Has it ever been so well timed? Probably not. And it probably never will be. I'm getting a little bit of strangeness here on my filter here. Let's just sort that out. Hello, Requiem. Good to see you around here. Whoa. Whoa. I apparently have some... Hey, Paximo. I just have to fix my video here. What is going on? We're gonna jack that up. I think that might help. Put this down here. I'm gonna leave exposure here. And then, hopefully, this will look a little better. There we go. Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do, pig. That will do. We'll do that. And then this, and then finally. You'd think that like things would maintain their settings across, but the problem is that I end up using this so often that for work that things just don't stay the way that they should. And let's also make sure that we change our topic to the real problems. There we go. Real problems like we're talking when you go cast a line and nothing happens. Muy frustrato. Yeah, so either way, it looks like we've got it sorted out, and here we are. I'm looking forward to this. It's been a little bit of time since we've just straight up addressed some of the more serious problems that we've had to deal with when it comes to role-playing. I mean, we did speedrunning for problem players, and we're always talking about issues, but sometimes you run into some real jams, things that are really gonna kind of take a lot out of you, and this is either as a player or as a storyteller in your games, but there are issues that we like to say just end up using your word hole, right? Just talk to somebody, just talk it out, discuss it, everything's gonna be fine, it's not a big deal. And even if it is a big deal, talking about it usually manages to clear the issue. Doesn't always work that way. And admittedly, this show wouldn't be very useful if all I ever did was say, just tell the person how you feel and then you move on. So today, what we're going to start doing at the very least, before we kind of fill the chat up and we get more people in and they start giving their notions on what they want to talk to, what they want to talk about is we're going to go into what I'm calling the real problems. So problems that are things that may arise in your game that are potentially outside your control, that can't be solved just as easily as letting people know what's going on. So we're going to start right away with the idea that a game that's otherwise going strong, it's otherwise going fine, ends abruptly due to circumstances outside your control. Now, when I first posed the question, I think that there were some interpretations of like a session going wrong, and I meant the entire game. I meant the Chronicle, which is known to happen. That you'll be playing in a game, things are going well, your players are gelling well, you're on a regular schedule, everybody's having a good time, and then, bam, the game has to end, and it has to end really abruptly. And there's a feeling in that honestly it can feel like a shock, like an emotional shock to the system, that abruptly a story that you're really invested in, characters that you're really invested in, but not just the story and the characters, but also the social act of gathering for play, whether that's virtually or in real space, it's gone. Common ways that this can happen is usually somebody critical to the game decides to quit. In some games, that's anybody. any player decides to quit and the game is over. In some games, that's the storyteller. The storyteller quits and nobody feels ready to pick up that slack. And in some games, it might be a player that is critical to the well-machined running of the game, such as, but we play at that person's home, and now they've quit the game and we don't have a place to play anymore. Which, I know that sounds strange for some, but it can be a considerable issue especially if you're young. If you're young and you don't have a space of your own, if you live with your parents or whatever, and everyone you know lives with their parents, it may be difficult to be able to gather and get together and be able to play the way that you want. Even if you have your own space, if you share a space, if you have roommates, it may not be feasible for you to be able to gather people in one location around enough space that you can comfortably play. Yeah, that was the first thing I mentioned, that it's possible that in a small group, anybody who quits means that the game is over. Yep. So Brain Torn Out pulls out another reason. I mean, shit happens, right? Myself had to end a campaign abruptly thanks to an early enlistment order. It sucks, but that's life. Yeah, absolutely. It is a dangerous thing that we have to deal with, is that any social group can change at any time, just out of the blue. It could be a sudden illness. It could be a relationship breakup. It could be somebody who has to move. It could be somebody's schedule changing. There's any number of reasons why that could happen. But the problem that remains in here is that it's not just that the game is over, and it's not just that the socializing is potentially over as well. It's also that all of these things kind of combine into one moment of shock, where now that the game is over, where do you go? Do you try to complete the story? Do you just try to put it on pause, hoping that you can come back to it later on? It's a tough situation to be in. And in all honesty, sometimes it's difficult to just talk it out, because one of the reasons why games end is also acrimony between players or storytellers. Look, the best answer that I can give you, first and foremost, is that if you know that a game is over, if you know that it's done, that there's no rescuing it, that this isn't just we have to pause for a couple of weeks, or we've lost our place to play, but we'll get one back soon. If you know that it's over, end it. False hope is one of the worst things, in my opinion, when it comes to role-playing, because the idea of, hey, we might get back to it, maybe we'll be able to do this, means that you're stuck in that holding pattern where you're waiting for a story to complete, you're waiting for your opportunity to exercise those creative muscles, and instead you're held in stasis. And it means that without being able to let it go, you may not be opening yourself up to new things that could occur. The idea of, I'm in a game, lingers with us, and it also can prevent us from making the right decisions for ourselves. Plus, you're setting yourself up for even more disappointment. The idea that you're waiting for a game that just isn't ever going to happen again means that as time goes by, that disappointment can turn into resentment, and that resentment can start not just be about the situation, but that resentment can shift to the people who are in that situation as well. You may start resenting those who have the issue with playing, or the person who had to quit. Biff the Boss mentions it's true, not getting to choose how to end something can leave players and storytellers alike feeling at loose ends and not willing to take a risk on another. And that's also true, that sometimes it sours the experience so much that you ditch the hobby altogether, which it's been known to happen. Rain Turnout mentions usually completing the story after such an abrupt end is impossible due to a laundry list of reasons. But as one shouty man once said, when life gives you lemons, throw them back at life. I believe the quote is, when life gives you lemons, throw the lemons back. That abrupt campaign I ended, I turned it into the starting point of another campaign with a big lore dump revolving around how a previous group of investigators, the previous group, suddenly disappeared without a trace. So this is a way of kind of making lemonade out of those lemons, to take a game that's dying and then revitalize it. But my first piece of advice, the one that I can most definitely tell you, is accept the loss. And I know that that's really difficult for some people to do, and it's been difficult for me in the past. just being able to say, no, this isn't going to happen. I have to let it go. I've had campaigns last over a decade that didn't end as I would have hoped. And part of the reason for that, two of the three players in the game, so a full half of the people involved, broke up and no longer wanted to be in the same room as each other. And that kind of soured the whole thing, and it ended at that point. I just knew there was nothing left. And there was no attempt to try to say like, well, maybe you can, patch things up. Maybe you can get things sorted out amongst yourselves that you can be in the same room again so that we can keep playing this game that we all love. It's too much of an ask. Way too much of an ask sometimes. But what do you do? What do you do after you've accepted that the game is over? So Requiem starts with one of the ways that you can deal with it. Sometimes, though not always, if a game ends rather abruptly and you cannot end it that session, you as a storyteller can send out an email or text ending to the game to give the player some closure. Idea, maybe. So definitely a good idea. There's a caveat I got to throw in here, not something that Requiem has mentioned, but the idea that you send off like an ending, a synopsis, this is how it ends, is absolutely a way to go, and it can be a way to provide some closure for people. And now that I think of it, I wonder. No, I wouldn't have it. It's archived somewhere, so I'd have to look. But I remember that I sent out an email at the end of that campaign to the players involved where I specifically just said goodbye to it. But here's the things I didn't do, and the things that I really urge you not to do. I didn't end a story. I didn't say, here's what the answers were, and I definitely didn't say, here's where the player characters end up. This is one of the things that I think that storytellers sometimes do when a game ends. I've seen it happen actually a couple of times. I've been involved in it a few times myself as a player, where when a game ends, the storyteller just says, and here's where the PCs end up. Here's the rest of their story. A PC story is not for the storyteller to determine. I know it sounds weird. The storyteller, ostensibly the person who's in charge of the overall story of the game, which again, not really true. They're more of a director, working alongside writers and producers. But there is but if you start taking away a player's agency, if you start saying this is how your character handles things, or this is what happens to your character in the end, you've essentially removed their ability to have any say in how the game ends. And that's kind of worse than leaving them in limbo, because they've spent their entire time during the game contributing to the story, building a character and seeing where that character ends up. And you've basically at the end said, no matter what, I get the final say. It's the ultimate railroad, because they can't even do anything with it after the fact because the game is over. Man, the idea that like, and because you ruined my game, I'm taking your autonomy. It's not that sometimes it's not even about somebody ruining the game, right? Two people break up. That's something that's going to happen in life, right? Like there's the risk that you take whenever you play with anybody is that person may end up having an overriding thing that it takes precedent over game. And I'd argue that a relationship absolutely takes precedence over a game. So I wouldn't say that it was anybody's fault. It's not like the game would have been just fine if they decided to continue to play, despite the fact that there was a ton of emotional hurt sitting around that relationship. But in the end, you can give an epilogue to NPCs that the characters know, to settings, places that the characters have been, and you can say goodbye. What I ended up doing was I picked some random NPCs and I said, this is where this character may end up going. Somebody maintains the castle for many years afterwards, always ready to entertain people with stories of their three friends who once upon a time spent a lot of time here. That kind of thing, right? Like the idea that NPCs continue, that their stories continued on, and that to get a little bit of closure there. But the most important element of that email was to acknowledge that the game was over, to end it, to cut the cord, to stick the landing, even though we couldn't stick the landing. It's if you tumble, I mean, let's go with an Olympics metaphor. Why not? If you tumble and you fall in a gymnastics routine, you still get up at the end if you can, if you're able to, and you do your victory pose for the judges. You always do, and you don't fall and then crawl up and then try to go right back to the beginning so that you could get back onto the vault and attempt the move again. If that was your last time, that's your last time. Cut it loose. Make sure that the players know that it's over. Give them a little bit of closure and make suggestions as to what could have happened in the world that they can imagine what their characters might end up doing. But aside from that, let it go. If you're in a position where the players might be able to write epilogues of their own, I would encourage them to do that. Let them. Make sure that they understand that, just tell me what happened to your character, not what happened to our characters or whatever. Because if your game ended in such a way that everybody still had great feelings about it and they just couldn't keep playing for whatever reason, then there's no reason why they can't participate. But if the game ended on a sour note, if the game ended because it had to and people were not pleased, sending that last message and then encouraging people to consider the game done is kind of the way that I would work in that particular case. Brain Tornout says, you definitely got to take it in stride. The thing I did was basically just a way for me to not completely lose all the hard work I put into the story. Salvage what you can, replace the rest. And I think that also is a way that you might be able to move forward. I personally warn new storytellers to not try to immediately reuse elements from before. It's, first of all, you learn a lot by doing something new. And second, the concept of using something that's old and making it into something new and different, it's an advanced move. It could really work. There are definitely times where it's worked quite well. The thing that you have to be careful about is that if you are playing in a game and then you take that existing character and you move it to another game, you're bringing all of that character's like insider knowledge, emotional baggage, and accumulation of story already written to that new game. It's kind of like going in with a 4,000 page character backstory, something that nobody could live up to, and you've already kind of cheated yourself out of a new character's growth. But if you have created a world that everybody really likes and you can use that world and repurpose it, it's a fantastic idea and a way for people to feel like things can continue on. Just be careful that you're not reusing something to the point where you're more attached to the old ideas than willing to accept new. So Requiem also points out, one idea I had in the event that it happened was to close it as a legend that was open-ended, summarize in a paragraph or two what the players accomplished, and end with whatever happened to the adventurers has been lost to time. Thankfully, I've never had to use that idea. I think that's a melancholy way to end a game, and sometimes that's exactly what people want. Melancholy and sadness are emotions that people enjoy, that people feel. But it is definitely melancholy. And if the game ends in such a way that, everything was going well at a clip, and then you say, well, in the end, nobody knows what happened, you're drawing attention to the fact that the game ended abruptly. Sometimes you want to do that, but sometimes that's actually kind of twisting the knife a little bit. It's sort of digging in. And in that case, what you could do instead is you could make it clear that while you're not going to tell the story, they're welcome to think of whatever ending they believe is best for them. And I kind of prefer this. The idea that instead of it saying what's happened is lost to time, you can say there's many versions about what happened to those adventures at the end. Right? The idea that people can come up with their own idea of what occurred and that nothing is particularly wrong or right. But not to encourage the idea that, well, we're all dust in the wind and whatever we do has only a fleeting presence on this hunk of rock rotating around a giant ball of gas that inevitably will die out, and then the heat death of the universe will destroy everything that we've known and loved. So that's, I think that the idea is very good. I personally would repurpose it as there are many versions of what happened, as opposed to no one knows what happened. But that's semantics, right? And you know how much I love my semantics. Oh dear. Yeah, let's be careful about that, right? Let's make sure that doesn't end up being my legacy. Paximo writes, my friend is running a campaign which is set in a world that has seen 2 other campaigns. The one before us hadn't technically ended yet, but it looks likely that the people won't rejoin to finish it. But when he mentions that part, he always notes that no one knows what happened to them since it hasn't happened yet. Yeah, the key really in the end is avoid determining what happens to a PC without the player's consent and contribution. It would be the equivalent of showing up to a game one day and the storyteller saying, sorry, you fell down a hole on your way to the next mission, and you fell for 70 meters, and then you landed in a splat, and that was it. Game over for you. But the player doesn't have any input on how that happened, right? Like, you feel like you just got things ripped away from you. The same thing happens if you say your character retired, you had a lovely life. I remember I believe I've told this story on this channel before. I was in a live action role playing game, a parlor LARP, maybe like 20 to 30 players. And the context for this game was you could play any of the major splats of the World of Darkness. So you could be a vampire, you could be a werewolf, you could be a changeling, you could be a mage. I think it was limited to those 4. I don't think you could play a hunter or a demon or a mummy, but you could play one of those 4. And I was playing one of the only guru in the game. And the thing about werewolves is that they hate vampires and believe that they should all be destroyed. And my whole thing throughout that entire game was find ways to make sure that vampires could be destroyed. That's the whole thing that he did, the entire game. And then at the end of the game ended abruptly, and the storyteller wrote a synopsis of what happened to each character, and wrote that my character became a diplomat, a liaison between vampires and werewolves, and brokered an uneasy peace between all of them, and was honored for his contributions there. Well, on the one hand, I can also not necessarily blame that storyteller who may not have been as familiar with Werewolf the Apocalypse as he was with Vampire the Masquerade. But I kind of was like, that's the opposite of what my character would have done, of what I was trying to do the entire time. I thought the storyteller was aware of all of my plans, especially because at every single opportunity that I took, I killed vampires. There was a tribunal at one point for my character killing vampires, and he got off. I was like so pleased that I managed to exist in a world where all I was doing was fighting the worm constantly. And yet I was told at the end, haha, sucker, you don't actually get to do that thing. Instead, you get to ally yourself with them. And at first I was like, does that mean my character got corrupted and like fell to the worm? Or is it just that you don't get it? But in the end, it soured the entire game for me because I was told what my character did at the end. And a lot of players felt the same way. There were like 30 different, little snippets of information. He went to a lot of effort. And that effort was completely wasted on most people because they hated the stories that he came up with. He tried to tie everything up neatly in a bow, and sometimes things don't get tied up neatly. And that's okay. That's all right. Some of the most memorable endings are when things don't get tied up neatly. At the risk of spoiling The Sopranos, a series which is now very old, The Sopranos ended literally on a cliffhanger. People were enraged. People thought it was marvelous. It's still debated to this day about the effectiveness of that last scene in the series finale. But it did not tie up the story. It absolutely didn't. It did not come up with an ending. And I am super pleased with that ending. I loved that ending. But of course that ending was planned. It was scripted. But it does mean that you don't always have to have everything sorted, everything tied up, everything ready in one polite little bow at the end. Let's have a look at the next problem. Somebody starts taking the game way too seriously, and bleed starts to become a major concern with this player. I don't mean that somebody is like, I'm trying hard, I'm doing my best to research the best tactics for this game, or is calling you in the middle of the night to talk about like how his character is doing or is trying their very hardest to come up with more and more costumes to top the previous costume that came before. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about situations where we have players who have clearly lost any reasonable amount of investment in the game for something that's gone way harder. Rock Pants, that is a direct quote from my life, and not a web series. The issue can be a couple. One of them that I've seen is somebody's character falls in love with someone else's character and they start obsessing over it. This is not a situation of, oh, I like the player and I'm going to see if I can get in with the player by liking their character too or whatever. This is a straight up, I got into my character, fell in love, and I am going to attach myself to these feelings of love and really engage it to do that. It can be hatred. It can be, you screwed over me in game and I resent you for it. And we're not even talking necessarily about like, I think that you just played the game wrong, but how dare you do this to my character? I was invested in this character. Now I have a problem with you. It could be that somebody is genuinely acting in an inappropriate fashion during game because of the amount of because of taking it seriously. So the first thing that I would say is that safety cards are your friend, or safety tools, and the proper application of safety tools will help prevent this from occurring. It will not guarantee it. Safety tools are A, only as effective as they are used, B, only as effective as they are respected, and C, sometimes they aren't used even when they should be by players who should know that they can use them and still don't. They are not perfect. They are not fail-safes, much the same way that a smoke detector doesn't guarantee that a house won't burn, or a seatbelt won't guarantee that you won't be hurt in the case of a car accident. So, but you absolutely want to have a smoke detector or a seatbelt, and you should be using them, and you should make sure that they're being used properly, and you should educate yourself on how to use them correctly. But that's only the first part of the problem. What happens if it's already happening? Talking to somebody isn't necessarily going to get you out of this. The issue at hand isn't, hey, you're making me feel uncomfortable, or hey, why don't you tell me what you need? Because this is at the point where somebody has become unreasonable. if someone has become unreasonable at the table, unreasonable taken in its very literal definition at this point of somebody who is incapable of using reason or of accepting reason, you're in a bit of a pickle. And we've all been around people who are being unreasonable at one point or another. But when it happens in a role-playing game, it can get dangerous, especially because it can mean issues between players and storytellers if one person is unreasonable, but sometimes it works out that two people are. I have seen people become quite enamored with their in-game relationship, even though both players very clearly were stating, I am not interested in this other player. Their characters were absolutely enamored, and they were doing everything they could to continue exploring that relationship. They were playing side sessions. This was in a LARP, by the way. They would run away together and start talking and ignoring the rest of the game for hours. Hey, Prampster. Thanks for the sub. They would go away, they'd talk for hours, they would ignore the rest of the game. When other actions would happen in the game or people went looking for them, they would ignore it because they just wanted to talk to each other. And then between games, they logged into the game's forums and just chatted for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, coming up with side scenes and all of that. As far as anyone could tell, there was nothing happening between the two players. But it started to really cause an issue because both players were in relationships and their their partners were also in the LARP and were noticing this behavior and were getting upset because the behavior was excessive and a little bit suspicious. Because as much as we might think that, yeah, I can separate my real life and my play life, it was getting so excessive to the point that there were questions of like, how could they not be cheating? That occurs. And when I tried to use my word hole, when I approached one side and then the other side and I said, hey, you're doing an awful lot of X and that is making people worried, the answer was immediately, oh no, it's fine, we're just playing the way that we want to play. And how dare people tell us how to play? And of course we're not cheating on anybody, and how dare anybody make that insinuation? And then immediately they turned it on me, and the anger was directed to me because I was the one who decided to address it by talking to them and saying, you're the one who is mistaken, you're the one who has a problem, you're the one who is insinuating all these bad things are happening, and that makes you a bad person. And it was humiliating for me because immediately everybody who had talked to me about this problem then echoed it because they didn't want to risk the wrath of these two players. It was just easier to deal with one. And for a while, I was a pariah when it came to this LARP. Now, admittedly, this was, way back in what in the United States would essentially be like the last year of high school or first year of college or university. And honestly, like, we were all dumb kids to a certain degree, but I had tried to solve the problem using my word hole, an early application of a thing that I hadn't even decided was a mantra at that point, and I failed. I fucked it up. So what do you do at that particular point? How do you deal with somebody who cannot see reason? Well, there's a couple of things. The first is the nuclear option. The game ends, or you walk away from it. A bit of an extreme, but it might be the only option you have. Or at the very least, the threat. The only leverage that you have in a way among your group of friends or among the game that you can guarantee is your presence. You can show up or you can't. No one can force you to play. And if you're like, this is making me uncomfortable, so while this is happening, I'm afraid I'm going to have to step away. I'm just not able to maintain this. This is an option you can take. It sucks in a lot of ways because it does mean that you are ending your participation in something that you might really enjoy. You're walking away from the issue instead of fixing it. but you can't fix all issues. And if somebody has stopped seeing reason, sometimes the only thing that they'll pay attention to is when you stop trying to pander to them and you start trying to think of yourself. Remember the whole put your own mask on before you assist somebody with theirs? It's kind of like that. If it's so much of a problem for you that you cannot deal with it and that talking about it isn't going to work, you can walk away. But let's say you still want to salvage it. You still want to be able to deal with it without running away from the issue, which again, that's like, even that wording is horrible, right? Like to say like, oh, you're running away. It's not running away. It's making the best choice for yourself. You make it open. You don't talk to somebody privately. You say, there's something that we have to deal with. There's something that we have to discuss, which is that people are taking this a little too seriously, or this is happening and it's a problem. I'm not talking about putting a player on blast. I'm talking about being very open about saying we need to find a solution to this problem. Two people are fighting. Two players or a player and a storyteller are actively being like against each other. Then you call it out. You're like, clearly the two of you can't stand to be in each other's presence right now. So what are we going to do about it? And if the answer is just like, well, everybody gets mad and walks away, it was probably going to happen anyway. At least you've gotten it over with. But sometimes instead of accusing somebody of saying you're doing a bad thing, stating facts and saying, what can we do to reach a conclusion? That might be the only choice that you have. That might be your leeway. Requiem, as always, has some interesting things to say. Just pointing this out, but when you try to address an issue and their direct response is to shift blame on you, this often means that the issue is very legit and they're trying to cover their ass. An easy way to tell if somebody is lying is when you tell them what you know, when you present evidence of their guilt, then like if you ask them, did you steal the cookie? Somebody who is innocent is more likely, this isn't perfect, but more likely to say, no, I didn't steal the cookie. A person who is lying is more likely to ask another question, either to delay, because lying instantly is hard, and so it's to delay, to give them a chance to think of an alibi, or it's to try to deflect blame. Why would you accuse me of stealing a cookie? Or what kind of person would steal a cookie? Or what makes me think that you didn't take the cookie, right? They're asking a question instead of just straight up saying, no, it wasn't me. Because also a direct lie for some people is very, very difficult. Not even hard to think about or hard to think of one quickly, but to just straight up lie is hard. So you build yourself up to it. You start walking before you run. In the same case that if you try to address an issue and the first thing that somebody says is, there's no issue here, don't worry. Okay. But if they start saying, oh, there's an issue, but the issue isn't this, it's actually this, that's something that you can pay attention to. Again, this isn't a perfect, this is not perfect psychoanalysis. This is not a foolproof method that you can't ever use all the time. But what it is an opportunity for you to pay attention to if somebody is actually feeling guilty, but does not wish to exhibit guilt. So what do? You make it open to everybody, and make it clear that you're trying to find a solution. You're not trying to punish somebody for what they're doing wrong. Punishment isn't really going to make anybody feel better, and it's not really going to fix things the way that you want them to. If somebody is being unreasonable and you say, you're going to have to leave the game, well, that might fix things, and in a game which can handle the loss of a player, great. But it's not actually going to, solve anything more than we're removing the problem from the source, and sometimes your game can't handle that. If you talk to this person and say, you're being a shithead and you need to get your shit together, you're actually directing something towards that person as opposed to engaging them in an effort to find a solution that everyone will be happy with. Saying, I've noticed that you and this person can't get along. What can we do to make this better? Or, so it seems like this character and this character are constantly fucking all the time. And that's not really what this game is about. People are like, I'm getting the feeling that not everybody wants to continue to examine this. So what can we do to still help you have a fulfilling role-playing relationship while also not making everyone else uncomfortable? What can we do as a group? Here is a definite problem. Here is an attempt to find a solution. Blame is not your friend in this particular case. And that was the mistake that I made back in the day. I went to them and I said, hey, everyone around you is saying that you're being kind of suspicious. And I made the problem about them. What I should have done is said, hey, so people are starting to feel uncomfortable. What can we do to make them feel more comfortable? And if their answer is like, well, fuck them, they don't deserve to feel comfort, well, then I know that this is a problem that kind of is a little more cut and dried, right? If it's like, oh, yeah, they're uncomfortable. Why are they uncomfortable? Well, it's because when you show up to game, they want to play with you, but you only ever play with each other. And they have questions about that. It seems strange to them. Then at least we can start digging down, because sometimes even if you mention, hey, these people are, experiencing this issue, even if they immediately say, well, then it's not my problem, it'll still stick around in their head. They'll still think about it the next time it comes up. But because you haven't specifically told them you're fucking up, and instead are posing the question of, what can we do to make this better? It'll give them more incentive to actually modify their behavior, because now they'll feel like they're doing something righteous. They'll feel like they're doing something that they actively enjoy or that they actively want to do. Let me see if I can pronounce this. Hey, Yusu exclamacao. I hope. I really hope. But hello, thank you for the follow. Saying, oh, wow, we seem to be running out of cookies way faster. Maybe we should bring more cookies. Maybe we should make sure that everybody has one before taking a second one, is a lot better than saying, Rock Pants, you stole all the cookies. What the fuck? In this particular example. So again, this is a different way of using your word hole as opposed to just head on directly addressing the problem. But somebody who is unreasonable, somebody who does not want to listen to reason, will not win unless your reason is open-ended and not directed at them. Let's see what else is kicking around in our thing. But they were so yummy. Reminds me, I mean, there's a poem which is one of my favorite poems of all time by a poet named William Carlos Williams called "This Is Just to Say," and it's a very simple poem. I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me. They were delicious, so sweet and so cold. I love that poem. I really do. And it is a lovely thing. And you just reminded me of it, so thank you for that. I appreciate it. Anyway, so next issue. What do you do if imposter syndrome starts to drag somebody at your game down? The most likely target of this is the storyteller. It is not exclusively the storyteller. But since the storyteller has the most responsibility placed on their shoulders, they often feel the most pressure and therefore are the most likely to fall to imposter syndrome. So, what is imposter syndrome? I mean, if we pull it up, imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments, and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. Despite external evidence of their competence, those experiencing this phenomenon remain convinced that they are frauds and do not deserve all they have achieved. Individuals with imposterism incorrectly attribute their success to luck or interpret it as a result of deceiving others into thinking they're more intelligent than they perceive themselves to be. It also occurs in normal human-to-human relationships. Based on the syndrome, continuing doubts about people and individual defense mechanisms are considered difficult to achieve healthy relationships. While early research focused on the prevalence among high-achieving women, imposter syndrome has been recognized to affect both men and women equally. And it also can occur in the context of mental illness and its treatment. Certain individuals may see themselves as less ill than their peers or other mentally ill people, citing their lack of severe symptoms as the indication of a no or a minor underlying issue. And people with this form do not seek help for their issues, seeing their problems as not worthy of psychiatric attention. So, all this to say, what's imposter syndrome when it comes to role-playing games? It means that one of the people at the table believes that they're not as good as they should be, or they're not as good as people think they are. Or they're just constantly doubting that they're actually good at what they're doing. And this is a dangerous situation because imposter syndrome is not as simple as going up to somebody and saying, "Hey man, you're actually doing a great job," or "What's up, my good NB friend? You're doing a swell job." It doesn't work that way. Imposter syndrome is one of those things that's kind of like nefarious, and it buries under your skin, and it interferes with everything that you're doing, because no matter what, you are constantly seeking for ways to be better, or you're constantly seeing ways in which you can improve, and yet everyone else doesn't seem to see it that way. They're not willing, or they're not wanting, or they're not able to push you as hard as you're trying to push yourself. And therefore, just talking to somebody doesn't always work in this particular situation. I have seen imposter syndrome ravage players and storytellers my entire gaming career, and it is something that I struggle with constantly. It is a nefarious, insidious, horrible, no good, very bad thing that just doesn't get solved with words. It might be that your storyteller believes that despite their hours and hours and hours of preparation, that they feel ill-prepared going into game. It could be your storyteller who prides themselves on their storytelling or characterization, feeling that the stories are flat, or that the characters just aren't as funny or compelling as they want them to be. It could be a storyteller who believes that nobody else at the table is actually having fun, that they're humoring everyone, or that they're pretending to get along. Zen of Games suffers from imposter syndrome as well. It's totally a fucking beast. It sucks. And I think that it's something that everybody deals with to a certain degree. I think that for some, it is genuinely like a really debilitating thing that they have to deal with. Depending on how well I'm managing my imposter syndrome at any one point in time, I will finish a session of my game and immediately start worrying that nobody had fun. That if it was a game that was all action, I worry that people really wanted plot. If it was a game that was a thinking, cerebral kind of game, I immediately worry that people didn't have enough action. That if it's a game of mysteries, I worry that either the mystery was too hard or too easy, and it was solved too quickly, or that since the players haven't already solved it, all they're going to do is curse my name for it being so difficult. And it'll keep you up at night. It'll make you worry. It'll make you really wonder why the hell you bothered doing it in the first place if you're so awful and terrible at it. And it only gets reinforced by people trying to convince you otherwise. And this is when somebody comes up to you and says, "I had a really good time." And your first thought isn't, "Oh, good. Phew. I'm really glad that this person had a good time. I thought they had a horrible time." And instead, the first reaction that you get in your head is, "They're trying to make me feel better," or "They're lying. to make me feel better, or they're just being polite, or they don't feel comfortable telling me how they truly feel because I intimidate them, or because they're trying to keep the peace. So if you can't help somebody with imposter syndrome by just telling them that they don't need to worry about it, what do you do? What the fuck do you do? It is rough stuff. And the idea that I think you have to do with somebody who is suffering from imposter syndrome is you got to be gentle. You have to be a little bit, I think you have to be a little bit persistent, and you also have to be specific. If somebody is like, oh man, like that session sucked, and you know that it didn't suck, saying no it didn't isn't actually going to solve the problem. Like you're giving an opposite, and the opposite is very easy to dismiss. Either the person is like, this person doesn't know what they're talking about, or again, this person's trying to be polite, this person's trying to keep the peace, this person's just trying to make me feel better, this person has ulterior motives, all of those things. Instead, you kind of have to be persistent and specific. By persistence, I mean you can't only tell somebody that things are good when they come out and say things are bad, because then it seems like it's just a reaction to your mood as opposed to being the truth. And if it only happens once and then you never mention it again, it definitely seems like it's somebody who decided to try once and then gave up. So the persistence kind of ends up being, at the end of game, be honest about how you feel about the game. I don't mean always say I had a great time, but here's where the second point comes in. Be specific. Hey, this thing, man, in this game, I really liked it when X happened. I really liked the mystery of this game. I really liked, getting deep or involved in... I'm sorry, what was annoying, Requiem? Hopefully it's not anything on our end. The idea of making sure that you mention like, whoa, like the combat ran a little long, but we got out of it. I don't know if I had such a great time today. I feel like my energy was low, and the mystery is just really difficult, and I can't figure it out right now. If you're specific, it means that somebody can actually believe that what you're saying is well-reasoned, thought out, and not a reaction to your mood. Because if it was just a reaction saying like, no, I had a good time, it's not as believable as, oh no, I love it when I get to spend like in-depth conversations with this particular NPC. Oh no, like big complicated combats like that, I thought it was run really well and we managed to get through it as faster than I thought we would. These are specific things that you can say to make somebody feel better. And it's not just for storytellers. Telling a player like, you know what, you came in and you had some really good lines. Like I loved it when you said, that's something. Hey, you've been making some pretty good tactical decisions recently. Like I know that combat's not the easiest thing, but I feel like you're starting to get a feel for it. You're gaining ground. It's another good way of putting it. I noticed that today just, the dice didn't go your way. It wasn't your night. Like that sucks. Like I get it. That's frustrating when rolls just don't come out the way that you need them to. It feels so weird to just be like, yeah, man, bad dice. But that can make a huge difference because at least you're acknowledging, hey, I saw that you were struggling and your struggle is real. And I also acknowledge that this was something that was outside of your control and not indicative of you're just usually a terrible person or you're just a bad strategist and you don't know how to play the game properly. So yeah, in that particular case, if you're dealing with somebody with imposter syndrome, be persistent, be specific. Hey man, nice shot. Pukajutsu, it is A, incredible to see you. B, if you haven't been following Pukajutsu, you you've got to, because in addition to amazing Final Fantasy 14 streams before it was ultra cool and only when it was pretty cool or mega cool, also has been playing for the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster, which, because I'm such a huge fan of that game, is just like a joy for me, and it's just a great place to be. Like, just go check out that community. It's an excellent one. And not to mention that at some point, Pook always has some great things to say. Also, honestly, the best emotes in the business. It eases the mood at the table. Yeah. So, Requiem, hey, DB3212. Requiem, you make a very good point. It eases the mood at the table just by saying, sorry, the dice weren't on your side tonight. Like, I totally get it. I have been there. I don't often be there at this point, because if I'm the storyteller, dice don't bother me as much, because I can usually manipulate the story around the dice if I need to. But yeah, as a player, sometimes, like, what's really bad is that if you have a low rolling game, if you have a game where maybe you don't have like a big action sequence and you just have one or two rolls, failing one or two rolls when you only make one or two rolls in the game just makes you feel like you are a loser. And at the end of the game, you're just like, well, I didn't fucking succeed at anything. Well, of course you didn't. You only rolled twice. And odds are that that's going to happen sometimes, that you will fail both rolls. So I think I handled a certain Black Spiral dancer having horrible dice rather gracefully. So yeah, it is a good point. For storytellers, when you have a character who's either rolling really hot or really not, there are ways around it. But remember that it's the... when you're revolving the story around it, revolve the story around player characters specifically. DB3212 mentions, just having players talking about the session in general can make me feel good, because it stands out somewhat, and listening is a great time for inspiration or ideas for next session. It's why I often like listening to players afterwards, because what they talk about, what they're excited about, is what I latch on to. I can finish the session and be like, oh yeah, this mystery is going great. But if all they're doing is talking about, like, I want these two characters to hook up, well, I know where their attention is. And maybe that's what they're going to focus on, and they don't care as much about the mystery. Or I learn, if I want them to care about the mystery, I have to tie it into those two characters hooking up. Listening is a great tool, but be that persistent. You'll notice that on Sundays at this point, we now, for the longest time, we started with play the game. Play the game being like, what was the moment in the game that was the coolest? And people would talk about it, and sometimes it would go, most of the time it went to a player, sometimes it went to something that I did as the storyteller. And then we shifted play the game to only players and highlighting a player action. And it was a lot of fun. People liked voting. We had the whole like play of the game. We had the whole graphics come up. It was fun. But then I realized that what we were doing was we were rewarding players for standing out, as opposed to players doing their best to play the game as best and as well as they wanted to. And so we've now shifted to a point where players just talk to each other and each player mentions something that another player has done at the table that they really liked. And then actually, at one point, players brought up, hey, but we don't talk about you anymore. And we tried a couple of things, but then the players themselves came up with the initiative that we're now going with, which is that they have what they're calling the Storyteller Spotlight, where the players decide on something, or more than one if they feel it's important, that the storyteller did that they appreciated, whether it's a story beat or a character or a moment or whatever, and they mention it themselves. This is something that can help mitigate that feeling of imposter syndrome, because it applies that persistence and specificity. The idea that every session they're going to mention something that they enjoyed, and that they can't just be like, I had a great time, but they have to mention something in specific that they enjoyed. It can go a long way to easing my fears of like, oh, they said that they liked that. Okay, good. All right, good. That's something that I can latch onto as a positive. And sometimes I need that life raft, and it's there for me. And that's handy. Requiem Lost says, actually had one combat where I, as the storyteller, was getting insanely good rolls while the player I was fighting was getting complete shit rolls. It was physically painful for me to get hit after hit on the player while they couldn't even touch my NPC. I think the player noticed my stress and was like, yeah, shit happens, don't worry about it. Yeah. You remember, your storyteller is as vulnerable as anyone else at the table, either when it comes to imposter syndrome or when it comes to just not feeling great about how things are going. And just because the storyteller has additional duties, responsibilities, and to a certain degree privileges, doesn't necessarily mean that they can automatically get out of what they want, because good storytellers are thinking about how to make their players happy, and they're not necessarily thinking about how to make themselves happy. DB3212 says that, or if they already figure out a possible plot hook, you can go more into it or give more out about it. Hell, I have twisted things or hit people harder with something to throw them off so they get that, damn, originally I swore it was blank. Damn you. And yeah, surprise is one of your greatest assets. Yeah, it is. These are absolutely things that you can do. And for Zen, Zen saying, I really like that idea. I'm starting a new Changeling, the Dreaming game very soon. I may implement that. Everyone highlights something they liked about each player and storyteller. I know it sounds really corny to put it this way, but it is actually one of our safety tools. It is the discussing a game afterwards is like aftercare when it comes to a BDSM scene. I've heard it described. I'm not for the record, I'm not an authority on BDSM, so if I get things wrong and please let me know, because that's the way it is. The concept of a cooldown after the game, where you talk about it, where you decompress, where you put yourself back into the real world, can really help not only put the game in perspective, it helps protect you against things like bleed, but it also gives you that opportunity to basically give everybody a round of applause to feel good about themselves. And that's actually important. I used to feel when I was younger that this wasn't something that needed all that much focus, right? Like, you don't need to applaud people in the end. Like, that's not such a big deal. We should be able to be happy with our play and move on. And as I grow older, I realize more and more that there's no reason not to. Safety isn't the kind of thing that, oh yeah, no, we don't need to be safe because we are resilient to harm. If you're safe, it means you can go harder. It means you can push further. And even the people who do the most incredible stunts are focused first and foremost on safety. It was a long time ago that stunt people did not focus on safety. I mean, this is something that came up with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where Quentin Tarantino implied that stunt people hated Bruce Lee, and people got really mad because Bruce Lee is regarded as like a mythical figure in Hollywood. But his argument was that stunt people at the time basically said that Bruce Lee hit people during fights because it looked better on camera. And to him, he was like, I would rather that it look better on camera, and I don't care. But that was completely unprofessional. It's the same with role-playing. Safety tools are there so that you can actually do better over a long period of time, instead of maybe getting one moment that you think is really cool but ends up hurting someone, and then those moments cannot happen again. So yeah, absolutely, I would recommend implementing this. It is a great way to deal with imposter syndrome. It is a tool in our arsenal that we use, because the other reason why it's a safety tool for me is that if somebody cannot answer a question at the end of game, I know something's wrong. If you ask, like, hey, what did you learn this session? And they can't answer you, that's a problem. And I just realized that I didn't ask that question the last couple of times. Oops. But yeah, I ask players, what did you learn? And they say, and I don't really I don't really think that it's important what they answer, other than I pay attention sometimes, because if somebody mentions something that surprises me, I hear, listen, think, retain. But if you ask like, hey, would you learn this session? The player's like, oh, I don't know. I didn't really learn anything this session. Nothing. Well, that's a problem. That is a problem that we have to be able to look into and adapt to and deal with. Because that is a sign that a player either isn't engaged or that they are upset. And if they're upset and can't answer a question, this is where I can find out. So that's why I ask. Requiem Lost asks, or mentions, I think, though I'm not positive, a way to tell someone is suffering from imposter syndrome is that they're always looking for criticism, constructive or otherwise. In my one data point, that's not the case. It can be, but I don't think that it's an indicator. Imposter syndrome is being convinced that you yourself aren't effective, that you're not good. Asking for criticism is a drive to do better. Imposter syndrome is being convinced that you're not as good as other people think you are. And asking for criticism, in a way, is basically saying, I believe you when you talk about me, instead of, I don't believe you when you talk about me because I know the truth. But again, I'm one data point. I don't have a monopoly on this shit. What's the next problem that we have to look at? Okay, someone at the table is becoming so frustrated that their in-game actions become self-destructive. What am I talking about here? Somebody who has decided at one point to make bad tactical decisions, to lash out in-game at other characters who are inappropriate, to basically take actions to sabotage the game either intentionally or unintentionally. I've seen players get driven to self-destructive behavior because they're upset or because they're bored. And I know that sounds horrible, but there is a difference between someone who says, I'm going to make a bad tactical decision because I think it's the correct thing for my character. Someone who says, I'm going to make a bad tactical decision because I think it's going to make the game more interesting for everyone. But then you get into, I'm going to do this because I think it's going to make the game more interesting for me because I will gleefully watch as other people watch their beloved thing burn. Or I just don't care anymore and I'm going to lash out in frustration because I just hate things. And that's kind of what we're talking about here at the end. It sometimes can be enough to be like, hey, what's wrong? But like somebody who's frustrated enough that they're already like just lashing out, doesn't work. I stop the game at that point. I put a pause in. I'm like, all right, we're going to take a break. Or if we're not just taking a break, okay, I think we're going to end the session here. Before there's an opportunity for somebody to do true damage. Because if somebody is that frustrated that they're willing to start doing things that are really going to fuck up the game, they're past the point where they're just going to be like, hey, are you okay? Like, no, they're not okay. They know they're not okay. And sometimes what's important is just taking a breather. I don't end the session unless it's really integral that I do. A pause is generally something that you can get away with because you can be like, hey, I gotta take a break. I gotta go to the bathroom. I gotta get some snacks. I gotta refill my water. I gotta stretch my legs. I've been sitting down all day. My voice is a little parched. All of these things are things that you can easily just sort of be like, that's what I gotta do right now. And then you can take it as an excuse to sort of calm things down. And then instead of making a scene, you can be like, yo, are you all right? Like, I have noticed this and I am worried about you. Because also remember that if you ask somebody, hey, are you okay? The default answer is often yes. Because it's the easiest way to get somebody off your back. Yeah, I'm fine. Or, even if the person is being very obvious and being like, no, of course I'm not fine, it doesn't give you an avenue to continue. But saying like, your character's acting kind of strange. Like, you seem frustrated. at the game. Is there something that I can help with? Right? Direct it to yourself. Direct it away. Putting a crosshair on somebody, not the crosshair, he's awesome. Put him on whatever he chooses to be on, as long as everyone's consenting. Anyway, but putting a crosshair on somebody and being like, I've noticed that this is something about you, and you have a problem. What are you going to do about it? What do you think you should do in this moment? You. Dangerous. Because what you're doing is you're putting the spotlight on them when they're already in a bad emotional state. Deflect the spotlight to yourself. I'm noticing that you're frustrated. I'm wondering if there's anything that I can do to sort of ease that. Is there something that I am able to change? Am I making combat too hard? Or like, is it, have we just not been spending enough time focused on you right now? Like, what can I do is a bit easier for somebody to handle than what can you do? So glad the stream is not 3D. I mean, yeah. But it could be. DB3212 mentions always use open-ended questions that force more than a yes or no answer. Because yes or no answers are easy, and it kind of also avoids the whole, like, it's hard to lie. Do you have a problem? No. Because no is an easy way for someone to be like, oh, okay, I did my job. I expressed concern, and now I don't even have the responsibility of trying to help somebody in distress. It's very easy to walk away from somebody at that point. Very, very, very easy. Because there's a relief there. Oh, there's nothing wrong? Oh, thank fuck. I thought I was going to have to, care. Oh, there's nothing wrong? That's great, because that means that everyone else who's having fun, clearly it means that you're also having fun, and we don't have to worry anymore. We can just get right back into game. Because dealing with problems isn't fun a lot of the time. A problem is something that you have to deal with, as opposed to something that you get to enjoy doing. Some people enjoy solving problems. It's true. I don't mean to imply that, but in general, I would prefer that my friends be happy than for them to be not. And if they're not happy, then I have to do something to help them be happy. It puts some responsibility on me. But if they say, no, you're good, you're in the clear, I absolve you of responsibility, well, then Yahtzee for me. I get to run out and do whatever the fuck I want. So keep that in mind. What DB3212 says is very, very important. Open-ended questions that force more than a yes or no answer. I've noticed you're feeling frustrated. What's wrong is a better question than, are you frustrated? What's wrong is still something that you can ignore. You can still be like, nothing's wrong. Like, you can deny, but I've noticed that you're frustrated and you've been doing this. So I'm wondering if I can help, because I think that I can make some changes for you is something that can easily happen. But yeah, it is a little bit difficult to deal with frustration like this, but instead of trying to address it very quickly, hit the pause button, take the pressure off everybody, and then you can try to bleed out that frustration properly, slowly, as opposed to, well, you're acting like a shit and you need to knock it off because the rest of us are trying to have a good time. I mean, do you honestly think that's going to work? Considering the way that I've seen it used sometimes, I think maybe some people do believe that that'll work. So there's that again. Here's another problem that I have run into that isn't always as simple as just using your word hole. What if you discover that someone at your table is cheating? And here's a question while I drink some water. I follow the Creative Chameleon school of you should be drinking water all the time. What would you do? Quickly, what would your first reaction be if you catch someone at the table cheating? Whether you're a player or a storyteller, what would you do? while we're answering that question, DB3212 says, another thing I've learned when it comes to players that might be happening, be cautious about how to talk about things with other players, because you don't want to make people resent another player. Same thing does to the player you're talking to, and not making it seem like a direct attack, because as stated, they may not know they're messing up. Yeah, people make mistakes all the time. What you're trying to do is you're trying to maneuver people in a social situation, and you're trying to make sure that they don't smash into each other. Accidents can sometimes be caused by two people acting in a bad fashion, but often accidents happen where one person is acting strangely and somebody else doesn't notice that there's anything wrong in the first place. So yeah, use some caution here. Definitely don't volunteer a tribunal for a player. That's not useful. Remember earlier in the stream where I mentioned, like, if you know that there's something that's wrong, if there's two players who are, definitely incapable of being in the same room together, it's no use for everyone at the table to be like, look, the two of you are fucking up, deal with it, and instead pose it as an open, so I've noticed that that we're having some difficulty with you and you not being in the same place. What can we do to make everyone feel better? What can we do to find a solution to the problem of the two of you having an issue? Because yeah, even though it probably is going to end up having to be that one of the two of them is going to have to like straighten up or get out, you're still not making it a judgment call, right? You're not saying, hey, so you're being an asshole to your girlfriend right now. What the fuck? It's more like the two of you don't seem to the two of you are arguing, and it's clear, like we notice. What can we do? Should we just take a pause for the rest of the day? Should we? Because this is not something that we can kind of deal with right now. Because the other thing that you want to do is that if somebody's doing something that genuinely is bad, don't let them get away with it. If two people are arguing at the table and they're bringing their outside baggage to the table and just having a lover's quarrel directly in front of you, you can be like, look, I get it. You two have stuff to work out, but it's not appropriate to be doing that in the middle of the game. So maybe we should just stop here. That's fine. It sucks, but I get it. Your thing is really important and I think you should deal with it right now. But don't put up with bad behavior. Because when you put up with bad behavior, you're encouraging it to continue. And when you encourage bad behavior to continue, you're not actually making yourself feel any better. For all those times that you have somebody kind of come in and keep doing something that really annoys you and you cross your arms and you're like, ugh, but you don't actually do anything about it, they'll just keep doing it. You got to put your foot down at a certain degree if something is bad enough. I'm not saying somebody makes a mistake and you got to make a big deal out of it. No, I'm not saying two people end up having an argument and it gets a little out of hand and so you immediately start dressing them down. No, but when something is definitely inappropriate, speak up, speak out, get it out of the way. And if you see somebody doing something that's truly terrible, get it out of there. Deal with it right the fuck away. You do not want to be in a situation where you have discovered that everyone ends up hurt or damaged as a result. Because, yeah, if I notice somebody who is feeling uncomfortable at the table because somebody was making inappropriate comments, of a sexual nature or whatever, that's not the sort of thing that I'm going to be like, I'm going to quietly talk to you at the end of the game about it. Hey, no, knock it off. Make it clear. Because the other thing is that if somebody does that at my table, you're basically one step away from getting kicked out anyway. So I'll take you the benefit of the doubt that you may not have realized what you're doing. And I also do believe that, one infraction for some things isn't enough for me to be like, I'm going to give up on you for the rest of your life. But anyway, I got distracted there. DB3212 says, I had a player who became complacent, stopped fighting tactically, because his team was good. This made other players hold back and fighting because there was not enough pressure on NPCs. The players had no idea he was doing this, especially because his dice love him and he usually hits and actually crits like crazy. Yeah, some people have all the luck. But it turned out that his mother had cancer and he'd been really out of it and it was eating him up. And yeah, like that's the other thing. Don't assume you know what's going on, because you might not. Requiem drops an absolute. All cheating is bad, but minor innocent cheating can be more difficult to address. I think I've said this on this channel before, but I think it's been a while, so I will say it again. And this might actually be considered a hot take, so be warned. I don't think all cheating is automatically bad. And the reason why I say this is because I think that there are times where people cheat in order to stay sane and to help the rest of the table, than not. Because what do I mean by cheating in this case? I have noticed 3 kinds of cheating, let's say, in a game. The cheater who cheats because they desire to be looked upon as better than they are. You know, like they want to be the hero so that everyone at the table is like, oh, you're cool. There are players who cheat because they believe that the game is stacked against them and that cheating is the only way to balance the scales. And there are people who cheat because they believe that by doing so, they're making everyone at the table happier. And that's where it gets complicated. You could say all cheating is bad, and to a certain degree, yes, cheating destroys the integrity of the game part of it, and that if you let cheating go, then what you're doing is you're essentially saying that the game elements, the game mechanics are not important. But there are issues where there are times where somebody is cheating for a good reason. And the biggest example of that are storytellers who fudge die rolls. Now, I'll also point out that technically a storyteller fudging a die roll isn't necessarily cheating, because in a lot of games, the storyteller can basically break rules if they believe that it's important for the good of the game, or that anybody can break a rule if it's for the good of the game. So there's kind of like that built-in thing. But I would just say that, first of all, if somebody is cheating, it can be a sign of a bigger problem. So if you catch somebody cheating, my first thing to tell you is don't immediately crucify this person. It's not worth it, especially because they might be cheating for a reason that is actually something important to address as well. So DB3212 mentions, for instance, that I have found that players have messaged one another plans during combat, telling them what they should do instead of talking in character. So it kind of depends on how you run the game. Some people will let these sorts of tactics proceed as usual. Some people won't. Some people, like, for one thing, if I find out that somebody messaged another player to tell them what to do, and that player doesn't want to be told, that's a problem. But to a certain degree, sometimes I can take cheating and validate it by sort of saying, like, well, these people are soldiers. They clearly, like, they practice together, they learn and they drill tactics together. So when we're talking about, like, people discussing their plans openly during combat, then I'm like, yeah, well, that just makes up for the fact that we can't simulate the fact that these people would be spending most of their free time training and drilling together, which we're not doing because this is a role-playing game and we're simulating things as opposed to doing things for real. But yeah, first of all, try to figure out why the cheating is happening, and try to figure out also the severity of the cheating, because severity does actually make a difference. Is somebody, fudging a roll here and there and being like, yeah, I rolled an 18 as opposed to, oh, I actually rolled like a 17, but I know that the chance to hit is 18, so I nudged my number up by 1. Or, yeah, I claim that I have inspiration when I don't, but it means that I get 2 rolls. Cheating is also sometimes just laziness, like, oh, do I have inspiration? Yeah, I probably have inspiration. And then you roll. Because sometimes we manage to convince ourselves that we're not cheating in the first place. But your RPG is a Dragon Ball Z tabletop RPG. I would never have guessed based on your icon. But it makes sense. It also depends on the rules of your table, right? DB3212. It's if your table allows these sorts of things, it's not cheating. If you've kind of made it clear that you don't want this sort of table talk, and then they just start doing it, but behind your back, yeah, it sucks. But there's other things to take into account. Rip Krillin. There's other things to take into account. There are, for instance, when Requiem mentioned here, I was thinking more disruptive cheating. Fudging a death save roll is sort of a meh, no biggie. That one actually can be one of the biggest biggies of all. Because while you may not care that the character dies or not, another player might, especially if that character has had a character killed. If they got killed because they rolled their death saving throws and failed 3 times and therefore the character dies, but then somebody else fudges a death saving throw and lives, that player may legitimately feel like they're wronged. They lost a character, but someone else didn't because they cheated. So it's not always as easy to figure that out. But I would also argue that a death saving throw, if you don't mind if they fudge those rolls, then you should just eliminate death from the game. And eliminating death from a game isn't actually as big a deal as everyone makes it out to be. You can straight up be like, okay, well, if you would be rolling death saving throws, then you're removed from combat. You can't actually fight for the rest of combat. And if it makes story sense, we can talk about whether your character dies. Like, you can totally do that. It makes sense. It's easy. It's fine. But what you shouldn't do is be like, there's a mechanic here and you have to roll it out, but I'm going to ignore it anyway, because then it erodes confidence in the rest of the game. It basically then becomes, oh, well, as soon as somebody doesn't like something, it doesn't happen. Whereas mechanics are introduced because in reality, the reason why we can feel such highs is because we also have to feel lows. A game that has no death can work quite well. Like, imagine a video game where if Mario gets hit by an enemy, he bounces off it and he doesn't die. And he just keeps going. And like, there's no interruption, there's no penalty, there's no way to die, there's no game over. That's fine, if that's the way that you've designed your game. But it does mean that if you make it to the end of the level, it feels less of a I defeated the challenge and more of a I ground my way to the challenge. So there is that. But then again, they also engineered things like in Super Mario Odyssey, you die, you lose 10 coins. And you can get those 10 coins back pretty quickly, usually. And their game overs just don't happen. So there's a small penalty for dying, but it puts you like right back where you were before, and you keep going. And they've basically said, yeah, death is a thing, but we've made sure that it stings a lot less. So there is that as well. Well, so if you ruin fear, why are we playing? If we wanted a book, we could write one. So the way that I look at this is, if you want to use a system that basically eliminates the chance of failure, I don't think that's a problem. Go for it. There are plenty of systems out there that do that. But if you've chosen a system that has failure in it, and you've decided to ignore those failures, you're basically taking extra steps for no reason, and you're ignoring the reason why these game mechanics exist. So, kind of a balance. But I also know that there are many different reasons to cheat, and I know that it is often very difficult and very fraught to confront a cheater. Because it's a very serious accusation, and if you get it wrong, oh boy, and if you get it right, it's often incredibly difficult or impossible to prove. There are things like somebody who consistently rolls high dice seemingly all the time might just be having a really good session, or they're lying about the results of their dice rolls, or they're using loaded dice, but like loaded dice are a bit easier to prove. This happens. Sometimes people go on a lucky streak, and if you start being like, I think you're cheating, then that player will rightfully feel hurt. But also, how do you prove it? Unless you can specifically be like, I've seen your dice come up. You rolled a 7, then a 10, then a 15, then a 4, and instead you said that you rolled a 12, an 18, a 15, and then a 16. It's not going to look great. Not to mention the fact that, again, as much as it's also hard to prove that somebody's cheating, what's your end goal? Is your end goal to be like, hey, you're cheating, I want you out of my game? Okay, it can work. But if it's just, hey, I want you to stop cheating, accusing somebody of such a big deal can create an irreversible action. So instead, what I would do, instead of straight up accusing somebody of cheating, is I'd let them continue to cheat as long as it wasn't egregious and as long as it wasn't ruining another player's good time immediately. I would wait until the end of the session, and then afterwards I'd be like, hey, so I'm noticing that, you're not keeping track of your hit points the way that I'm keeping track of them. Like, our totals are differing. I wanted to check in with you on that. Or I noticed that like you've been rolling a lot of successes recently, but I don't get to see the dice, and I kind of would like to see the dice when they hit the table. Just, actually, in that case, I wouldn't say you've been rolling a lot of successes recently. I'd be like, hey, so just for what it's worth, when you roll the dice, I'd like to see them. Let me have a look. Sometimes just the hint of being like, I'm suspicious is enough to get people to knock it off. But there are ways to sort of imply to somebody, I know you're cheating. I'm not going to outright accuse you of it, but instead I'm going to state this again as a problem that we want to solve. Hey, so our HP totals are differing here. Like I've been tracking everybody's hit points, and like it seemed to me that a few points in that combat you should have been below 0, but you didn't call it. So I just want to figure out, is there something that like, do we have the right totals? Do I have your correct hit points? Or are we miscalculating? Can I make it clearer how many hit points you're losing at any one point in time? All of these things, or it could be like, hey, maybe we should start using a tool like D&D Beyond or Roll20 or whatever that can automatically track these things for us so that we don't have to rely on our weak, feeble human brains. But the thing is that in mentioning it, what you're saying is, I recognize you're cheating, but I'm not willing to like straight up punish you for it yet. What I want is for you to come to an accord with me on how to move forward. Because sometimes a player will straight up admit, yeah, you got me. I've been rolling more successes, but like, it's because I don't feel like I can do anything. Like anytime that most combats, if I play it by the book, I don't do anything right and I'm not having fun. This is something that I can act on. That's now something that I can do to help somebody. I'm like, oh, okay, you feel like you're ineffective. Let's investigate this. Because I'd also rather somebody come to me and said, I'm ineffective in combat. And I'm like, well, yeah, because you built your character completely like wrong for what you're trying to do. Let's work together to redo your character sheet so that you can be more effective. I'd rather do that than have somebody who just straight up feels the need to cheat. But I can also run into somebody who will be like, okay, so yeah, I don't agree with you. I'm not are you accusing me of cheating? I'm not cheating. At which point I could be like, okay, it's fine. Like, back off. It's okay. But going forward, I just want to be sure, because whether you're like, even if you're not cheating, we're still not at the same understanding of what should be happening. And I'd like to be on the same page. So there are things that you can do about that. In general, though, if you encounter somebody who's cheating, you try to mention something about cheating in a way that you make it clear, and the cheating continues, then you're at a decision point of your own. Do you put up with the cheating, and do you think that it will ruin the game for anyone else, including yourself, or do you let this person go? There's a reason why casinos are very harsh on cheaters. It's their livelihood, right? The casino's entire purpose, the entire reason for being, is to make sure that you don't win as often as they do. And when you cheat, you add to your edge, and that's no good. In the same vein, in your game, if somebody is cheating, it means that they're putting their own needs or their own desires ahead of those of random chance. And random chance is what a lot of role-playing games rely upon in order to maintain the unpredictability of the narrative and to help drive interesting scenes forward. So, if somebody is constantly trying to get around that, to manipulate that, you are within your rights to say, you are no longer welcome here. I have played board games with people who cheat, and I remember that at one point, I realized that there was a player who I was playing against who started trying to cheat because he could not beat me. And instead of accusing him of cheating, which, again, would have been very difficult for me to prove, this was, it's not like we were playing recorded matches or whatever. It would have been very difficult for me to prove. I just straight up started saying, I don't want to play with you anymore. And when the person complained, and it's like, why? I said, I think you know, but I don't really want to play with you right now. And I don't want to play with you again. Sorry. And I felt better, because it was just aggravating me to play with a cheater. And I knew that I couldn't solve the cheating problem because this person was desperate to win. And I don't want to play with somebody who's desperate to win and wanting to win outside of the game's rules. It's just not my thing. I don't care. I don't want to. So I just said no, and I walked away. If it's in a role-playing game, you can leave a table with somebody who's cheating. But also, if you have that kind of clout, you can just be like, I just don't think I need you here anymore. Address the problem. Make sure that they know that you're just not going to put up with it anymore, because it's not worth it for you. It's just not worth it for you to deal with a cheater. Sometimes your best option is to cut out the problem as opposed to trying to fix the problem. In much the same way that some diseases, like better to amputate and save the rest of the body. Same kind of deal. And then finally, the last problem that I had prepared today was, what happens when your safety tools fail you? So, you have read about the X card. You know lines and veils backwards and forwards. Maybe you know about RPGClinic safety cards that we're figuring out and developing ourselves. Maybe you're using a safety flower, or maybe you have any number of other safety tools that you've used in an attempt to make your role-playing games safer for everyone at the table. And it still doesn't work. What do you do? This one's tough because you can't always know that something has failed, or you know that something has failed, but to interfere right away would make things worse. If your safety tools fail, you have to triage and figure out the damage before you do anything else, if you can. If it's very clear that somebody is in distress, stop playing. If it's very clear that somebody is not okay, stop playing. And if that person says, no, I want to keep playing because I don't want to be the focus of attention, you can always say, I am in distress, so we need to stop playing. I am uncomfortable. I'm not okay, right? You can pull it on yourself if you have to, but stop the game right away if your safety tools are failing so that you can try to regroup and figure out what's going on. But there are definitely times where I've noticed that a player is in distress and unwilling or unable to do something about it, even if safety tools are present. This is why we also go over our safety tools every damn session. If you're doing it at home, if you're just doing it with your friends, you can take 30 seconds. You can just go over and say like, okay, so we remember that we all have our lines that we don't cross, and we have our veils, which are okay, but we fade to black if we have to. Oh, and by the way, we have an X card. And if somebody holds up the X card, what that means is we have to change what just happened because somebody is uncomfortable. Just saying that out loud makes it a bit easier for people to use the safety tools because they become normal. It's also part of the reason why we have a green card in our safety tool regimen, because it gets people used to the idea of presenting cards when they need to. But I have noticed that there are times where somebody has been in distress and they are not using the tools that are available to them. Even in the early days where the original safety tools was, if you're in trouble, go and talk to somebody, which is obviously not a fantastic safety tool, but they weren't doing it. And then what do? You are always within your rights to ask for the game to stop for your purposes, not on behalf of someone else's. And you're always within your rights to say, I have to stop. I'm in distress because I'm not comfortable with what's happening at the table right now. Even if you're not the source or the victim. Because A, any table worth their salt should stop if somebody asks. And B, your feelings are as valid as everyone else's. But if you are playing in a game and your safety tools fail, then you need to figure out the damage and see what you can do to control that damage right away. If somebody is being bullied at the table, you can act on it. If somebody is freaking out because you've accidentally touched on a phobia that they didn't realize they had or that they never told anyone about, then you can immediately retcon the game and go back to it. But the safety tools failing, as in other people are ignoring it or whatever. Okay, so this is getting into Requiem asking like, this would depend on how it failed. If the safety tools exist but people aren't respecting them, then the game must end, or your participation in the game must end. Because if they're not respecting safety tools, then this is the equivalent of, playing with fire. Because clearly, if somebody's trying to use a safety tool and nobody's actually doing anything about it, then they're actively worse. So get out of Dodge. If people are ignoring the safety rules because they aren't aware of how they work, or because they're genuinely just out of practice and they didn't remember, this is something that you can bring up at that time, at that moment. You can say, I think we need to have a refresher course on how this shit works. I have been role-playing my entire adult life and even earlier, and I go over the safety rules every goddamn session now. I've only just started doing that in the past few years. It took me that long to figure it out. Safety tools as part of role-playing is a relatively new invention. But I do it every time now, and I will from now on. And I have more role-playing experience than most people I know. Straight up. I most likely have more role-playing experience than most people who watch this channel by virtue of my age, let alone anything else. This isn't a brag or a boast. This is me trying to let you know that if I need it, I imagine you do too. And since I started playing with safety rules or safety tools, I have enjoyed games more because I know that now there's more protection out there for me. But because I also go over them every session, because my players also go over them every session, I feel like we'll actually use them when the time comes, when it becomes necessary. There have been plenty of publicized incidents where somebody has, on stream, with active safety tools in place, ignored them or made them unavailable. But we're going to try our best not to fall into that hole. we'll keep reminding ourselves day after day what they are, how to use them, and in what circumstances is it appropriate. We just have to hope that everybody does the same. We're working on some cool projects at the moment. One of those projects is actually trying to publicize a guidebook for the way that we use our safety tools, and also some theories as to why our safety tools work for us, because we think they may work for you. Not necessarily, not always, but we believe that they might work out for other people. It's one of our projects, but in all the other projects that we have that we're thinking of, all the ideas for other shows that we can do for this channel or other role-playing related things that are up in the sky somewhere, the safety tools are always not far from my mind. And if safety tools fail me, then I know that some real shit's gone down. And it either means that we have to be that much more vigilant, or that somebody's got to go, whether it's the person who is ignoring safety or myself. So we know, and we'll deal with it. But those are the ideas that I came up with. Those are the scenarios that we had developed in our Discord. So if you there's a link to the Discord right down below. If you want, our bot's not currently active, so I can't just plug the command in, but joining the Discord is cool. It's a great place to discuss your games and discuss what's going on. But otherwise, I can tell you, tomorrow there's going to be a different kind of stream, I believe. I'm not sure exactly what's happening tomorrow, but I know that Elizabeth or Scott will let people know. The same for Saturday, but on Sunday on this channel, 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, there will be Exaltwitch Academy episode 4. God, we're already up to 4? I guess we are. Season 2, episode 4 will be right at you, and that'll be right here. I'm looking forward to that. I'm hoping that you are too. I'm hoping that at some point you'll either keep an eye on our Twitter or keep an eye on our Discord, because if there are some cool projects coming up, then I'd hope that you'd find out about them when they become available. So just have a look. Have a look-see. See if you can figure that out. See if that might be an interesting thing for you to look into and see. But otherwise, I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions here, if they have any other topics they want to discuss. But otherwise, it's been great to see. It's been great to talk. Great to hang out with all of you. Unrelated question for me. If I'll indulge your curiosity, go for it. I'm happy to listen. Incidentally, I'll probably talk about this in the Discord. There had been talks of me going over somebody who wrote a lengthy review of the first streamed game that I ran, that we played. And while it was, I guess, the same group, we were running it over on my channel. I've decided not to, because I realized that 90% of the things that I would say is that person is entitled to their opinion and their taste. And 10% of it would be, yeah, no, you make a very good point. We've tried to fix that since, because this was, years ago that we started doing it. So I'm not going to do that. While I may not necessarily agree with the tone of the review, seeing as how the review ended in a general, this is a good thing to listen to, and it's consistently good throughout, and yet most of it is critical words of I didn't like this and I didn't like that and I think this is bad. Who am I to critique a critiquer, right? So we're just not going to. Requiem, just let us know what that question is. There it is. Okay. There we go. As a storyteller, how many reoccurring NPCs do you feel you can handle in a game before it becomes too much? I feel it can be a lot to track. It's a very personal question, as it turns out, Requiem, because it kind of depends on who you are and what kind of storyteller you are. If you're the kind of person who writes everything down in binders and you cross-index all of them, you can handle hundreds, thousands if you need to. If you're the kind of person who comes up with things on the fly, that number may decrease. The best answer that I can give is add NPCs until you feel that you've lost track, or until you feel that you're uncomfortable, and then stop adding NPCs or start taking some of them out. It's okay. It's totally fine if your players encounter an NPC and then that NPC goes away and they never see that NPC again, especially if they never ask about that NPC again. It's also totally okay if you tell your players, I mean, it's not ideal. It's like as an ego thing, it's not great, but it's okay to tell your players, I forgot. Like, oh, that NPC? Wow, I just came out with that NPC for like a 2-minute conversation that you had 20 sessions ago. I don't remember anything about them. You know, like you are within your rights to say that. I feel like reoccurring NPCs, you have to sort of get into the habit of knowing where your limits are and then playing around them. It can help to make sure that your NPCs are distinct. If your NPCs can kind of blur into each other, that's a little harder to deal with sometimes, but if they're distinct, then it can be easier to handle. So, you know, take that into consideration as well. But no matter what, it is okay for you to have a limit. It is okay for you to have a limit that is perhaps smaller than someone else's limit. Don't hold yourself up next to somebody who you have played with or somebody who you have seen play. And abso-fucking-lutely do not hold yourself up to somebody who does this on a live stream or on YouTube or on a podcast. Many of the people who people watch online are professionals. Straight up. And if they're professionals, comparing yourself to a professional is counterproductive. Also, people who have big streams often have big help. I like they have crews to help them out with things. They have people who fill out their wikis for them so that if they ever needed to consult things, people have already chronicled everything for them. I'm lucky enough that I'm in that situation where if I don't remember something, somebody might have gone onto the wiki and just made the changes themselves. I also am lucky enough that I have players who will pick up slack for me if need be. I have Kate who handles a lot of our tech and a lot of our of the load of a stream, so it gives me more opportunity to pay attention to other things. You may not have these benefits. You might not have literally professional actors and a professional stage manager ready to help you make the game look amazing or help you do your job. I do. And you see how often I fuck up. Don't compare yourself to me or anyone else. Just run your own race because it's not a competition. So I wouldn't worry about it. Requiem, if you're feeling overwhelmed, scale back. I guarantee you your players aren't going to have that much of an issue with it. And if they do, I guarantee you they won't have an issue with it if you tell them, look, I legitimately don't remember, or it was a lot for me to handle and I just don't have it on me. And if they have a problem with you after that, I guarantee you that you're doing yourself a favor by walking away. Because as we've mentioned throughout this entire episode, sometimes you can't just use your word hole. But I will still encourage everyone that it is often the best way for you to get what you want with your role-playing games. We'll see you next time.